Hello there and welcome to another one of these longer videos where I try to explore the similarities and differences between words which have been causing my students problems. The three words I'm looking at today came up in class this week actually, where one of my students suddenly asked me, so what's the difference between select, opt for and choose? And this was one of those moments where I did what you sometimes have to do as a teacher. I basically said, that's a really good question. I don't think I've thought about that before. Let me go away and have a think about it and I'll get back to you. And that's what this video's about. So part of the problem with these three words is, as we'll see, when you look them up in a dictionary, the meanings are basically more or less identical. When this happens, it usually means that the difference lies in the way we use these words. And of the three, choose is by far and away the most common. The dictionary definition of choose is decide what you want from two or more things or possibilities. And it's very widely used in everyday speech. So, as a teacher, you might give students a list of possible discussion topics and tell them to choose two topics they're happy to talk about from the selection, from the list. We were also talking in class this week about gender-neutral job titles and the way that actor has become generally the most widely used word to talk about men or women who act for a living. And if you choose to say actress rather than actor to describe a female actor, it may well be because you're deliberately trying to belittle them. You're deliberately trying to downplay the work that they do. Maybe when you're in your teens or early 20s, maybe later in life, you might find that you have two different romantic interests in your life, and you might have to choose between the two men in your life or choose between the two women in your life. You might need to choose which one to ditch and which one to commit to. If you have kids, you sometimes need to tell them, hey, come over here, choose which flavour ice cream you want. My kids usually go for rum and raisin or salted caramel. Sometimes when you're shopping, you might take forever in a particular shop because you can't choose between two different things. You like them both equally. If you need to have a delicate discussion with somebody, or there's something that you need to say, but you need to be careful how you say it, you need to choose your words carefully so that you don't make the situation worse. You need to be diplomatic. If you're looking for a place to eat, a friend might recommend a particular area and say, go down to Brick Lane. There are plenty of restaurants to choose from there. And maybe when you're in the restaurant, you might think, it's great. There are plenty of vegetarian dishes to choose from here. You can also choose to do something or choose not to do something. So, maybe when you go on holiday, if you're on a bit of a tight budget, you might deliberately choose to stay in cheap hotels so that you've got a bit more money to do other things. If someone gives you unsolicited advice that you didn't ask for and didn't really want, you might choose to ignore the advice. And lots of people nowadays choose not to have kids. If you think that two things are basically very, very similar and you're finding it hard to decide which one is better, you might say, there's little to choose between them. There's not much to choose between them. I don't really know which one is better. You might also know the expression, beggars can't be choosers, which basically means if you don't have much money, you don't have much choice. So maybe you're looking to get a cheap flight to London this summer and the only thing you can find under £100 leaves at 5 o'clock in the morning or gets in at 2 o'clock in the morning. But you have to book that one because beggars can't be choosers. If you don't have much money, you can't complain about the choices. If you don't have much money, you can't pick and choose. You just have to take what you're given. When you look up the word opt, again, the meaning is very similar to choose. The dictionary definition of opt is to make a choice, like to choose, one instead of others. But I think the useful thing about opt is it can be used with a wide range of prepositions. So, for example, when my mum hit 62, after lots of problems in the school she was running, she opted for early retirement. She basically chose to retire early. So you can opt for something. We were talking in class this week about beliefs in the paranormal, and one of my students suggested that the reason lots of people believe in the paranormal is because they opt for easy answers. They opt for easy answers over accepting the complexity of life. You can also opt for an operation. So, for example, when I slipped a disc in my back at the gym and I was in a lot of pain, the doctor told me I had two choices. I could let my back try to heal naturally, or I could have an operation. I asked him what most people do, and he told me, well, most people opt for the operation. They opt to have the operation. You can also opt out of things. So last year I got an email from my bank, for example, telling me that I could opt out of paper statements. You know, things like this that are sent to me through the post every month. And instead, I could opt to get my statements online. In the same way as you can choose not to have kids, you can opt out of having kids. Same meaning, different grammar. Maybe at work, your company has a health insurance plan. And perhaps if you're particularly short of cash or you've got financial obligations, you might opt out of the work health insurance plan. In the same way, every month we send out a letter to people who've signed up to our mailing list at Lexical Lab. And every month, some people opt out of the mailing list. They unsubscribe. You can also opt against something. So a friend of mine recently was thinking about buying a new vehicle. His old car had died, and he was toying with the idea of getting a motorbike. We had a long conversation about this, and eventually he told me that after a lot of thought, he'd opted against buying a motorbike. He'd decided not to buy a motorbike. Select is probably the least common of the three verbs. And again, the meaning is basically choose one thing over another. But interestingly, usually according to some kind of system. And it's much more common in the passive form. So you see selected a lot more. So maybe your kid comes home from school gutted, very, very disappointed because he hasn't been, or she hasn't been, selected for the school football team. Maybe if you're quite well respected in one of your local political parties, you might be selected as parliamentary candidate for the area for the next election. And you often see this in news reports. You know, we asked a randomly selected sample of people what they thought about the new king. You might buy the selected poems of Emily Dickinson or T.S. Eliot. They've been specially selected by the publisher. You sometimes hear in advertising that special offers are available at selected stores only. So it's much more commonly used in this kind of way. Yeah, selected poems, selected stores, a randomly selected sample. Which isn't to say it's never used as an active verb with an object. You might hear, for example, when you start at university, that students can select modules according to their interests. It's also often used in computer speak, okay? So maybe when you're reading instructions on what to do if you want to, I don't know, do some particular thing on the computer, it might say select new mail from the send menu. Or maybe select the text that you want to format by pressing the left-hand button next to the tab. Okay? So I hope you found this useful. If you've got any questions, if you've got any other words that are confusing you, please do leave comments in the section below. And if you'd like to give examples of how you think you might use select or opt or choose, please do try and do that as well. Any comments you leave help us with the algorithms. Thanks a lot. Bye.